University of Illinois.
Checked on yourselves before Title IX, and that was all I could do.
You are an accomplished musician. You are a violinist.
Yes.
You are obviously co-founder of BET, and we know that well. But you're also CEO of Salamander Hotels and Resorts, 7 of them and counting.
Yes. Absolutely.
And you're an award-winning filmmaker.
You know, I won an Oscar.
I heard. And that you also held around with Robert Newman. I'm sorry.
Robert
Robert Redford, I'm sorry. I apologize. He's not as cute to me as he is to you.
He has a great head of hair.
He does, even at that
He's
age.
pretty short.
Is he short?
Oh, he's short.
Oh.
And I'm short, so it didn't matter.
You obviously the team president, managing partner, and governor of the WNBA's Washington Mystics and several other teams, and the first African-American woman to be an owner and partner in 3 professional franchises.
And you know, besides that, you know, the Mystics won the national championships in 2019. And our Cats won the Stanley Cup. Now, my men's basketball, just get it together.
You come talk to me. I'll help you draft. Let me see that. When we gonna buy the Redskins?
No. They're the Commanders now.
No, yeah.
They are. Yes, they have.
And they lost again.
They do. So, hearing all of that, someone might think that your life has been a crystal sleeve and that you have had an easy time. But your book is titled Walk Through Fire, a memoir of love, loss, and triumph. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin story of the title?
Well, I have lived a life in 3 acts. As you said, first was as a concert violinist, second BET, third is the hotel. Each one of those acts were punctuated by things that happened, and they weren't pleasant. Even as a concert violinist and growing up outside of Chicago, and really I was quite an accomplished violinist, but in the white community, they felt as though, especially when I won the first chair competition, and I remember this young girl came over to me, she says, "You only won this because you're," and she used the N-word. It was things like that. Even going to the University of Illinois, I was the only African-American there and had to really experience racism then. And then what was also happening was the Black Power movement.
Yes.
See, I'm starting to really date myself. See, I could be your mother. But anyway, those were challenging times, and they were times that I had to really navigate through. And I didn't, and you know, and even part of that first act was even when I was 16 years old. My father was the first, not the first, he was one of 8 African-American neurosurgeons in the country. He couldn't practice in white hospitals. He could only operate on African-American patients.
Yes.
And because of that, we moved 13 times. So that was tough on me. However, what I also found out, I developed a lot of resilience through every one of those moves and was able to learn how to assimilate through so many different communities, I have to say. But it was still tough because it was always about racism. And at one point, when we moved to Louisville, Kentucky, I actually, because I am so fair and it presents problems, and we can go into that later, but we shouldn't. But my second grade, I went into an all-white elementary school because my father did not want me walking through a cemetery to the all-black school. And we pulled it off. We pulled it off for a full year until he got transferred again. But these were things that I had to navigate and try and work through as a very, very young, I wasn't even an adult, a child. And I grew up having to experience the racism that we were going through during that first act.
Yes. And you mentioned the acts, and all good acts have characters. You also mentioned that you were a thespian. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But tell me about your relationship with your mother and your father.
Well, I really thought that I was the apple of my father's eye until one night, see, I get emotional when we're just talking about it, but I was being called for dinner. My father came to my room and he says, come on, I had bunk beds and I was on the top bunk. And he says, come on, I'll catch you, jump off. And I jumped off the bed and he did not catch me. He let me just hit the floor. And I'll never forget that because he said the lesson in this is don't trust anyone. But that was also a prelude. He just up and left us, like about a month later. And what had happened, and I realized this, and it still stays with me to this day, back then women did not have access to credit cards, bank accounts, and he wouldn't even place child support. I mean, he left us cold. And I had to grow up really, really fast. And it was at the point where I was doing different kind of jobs. One of them was mopping floors at JCPenney. And my mother, she was at the top of the society food chain up here. Then once he left, everybody abandoned us. And it really hit her hard. She just didn't even know which way to turn. And so I remember that. I still live with it. It bothers me to this day. I have 16 piggy banks filled with money because of what that happened. You know, even if the world fell apart, I'm like, I have money in these piggy banks. You know, things like that. You live with that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And that was tough. My mother was an accountant. So, I mean, they were well educated. She went to Temple. He was at Lincoln and then Howard Medical. But even then, and I will tell you, that because she didn't have a bank account or credit cards or anything, it was really hard for us financially. And do you know, even when I got my divorce, and this is in the early 2000s, I had to hire a lawyer to get my bank account changed into my name, to get my utilities put into my name. Everything that I had to be put into my name. And what I went through for a full year, I still wasn't acknowledged, even with the money that I had from the sale of BET. It was tough.
What lesson